All right, all you Stalinists out there, all you Marxist Leninists, this is the CutroneZone where we're going to be doing a debrief on Morbid Symptoms, the podcast, and their Bad Trot Takes debate with Chris Cutrone, which just ran live on the Sublation Media channel and also on their own YouTube channel. I followed most of it. I've got things going on here, but I had it on and was listening to it as it went along. And I just want to start by saying I have, after spending 16 years, coming up on 17 years probably in the podcasting universe on the left, and having witnessed quite a bit of these kinds of discussions, I have grown tired of them. There's something about them that seems static and unhelpful. I mean, you did a fine job. I'm not trying to come after you, but there was something about the whole conversation that seemed stilted and predetermined. And I just wish that we could do this in a more interesting way and do something a little different.
Yeah, think outside the box a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
These guys, I mean, so Tara Van Dyke, so she is Stalin Curious, she calls herself, and then she's done this podcast with Alexander McKay, who's part of a British organization called the Mongols Lenin Stalin Mao Institute.
Mm-hmm.
And they've done a few podcasts on my work, and then I was like, you could just talk to me directly, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they did something last year, and then they've done like something on my Greenland article with Compact, and then they also did, on Israel-Palestine. I'm not sure, what they did last year, but they've done at least 3, and maybe even 4 now, because they did something critical of my Socialist Unity article. And that's something that you noticed, that they had a very tendentious misapprehension, misunderstanding, misreading, kind of shockingly so, given what I say in the article.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so we did it. And, I came in swinging, prepared remarks,
Mm-hmm.
sort of, ragging them on their Stalinism. But then we had, a discussion. I mean, it's a curious thing. So, he's not a neo-Stalinist exactly. Like, I would say more the American Communist Party and Carlos Garrido are more like neo-Stalinist, because they do this admixture of like Duginism and this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they're sort of post-Zizekian left type people.
Mm-hmm.
This guy, Alexander, I don't think is that, although he's millennial.
Mm-hmm.
This phenomenon. And maybe the neo-Stalinism is more of a Zoomer phenomenon anyway than it is a millennial phenomenon. But it seems like what he described as his experience, that he was part of the Corbyn movement, that he's been sort of bouncing around the left and getting frustrated. And then he sort of lands in this kind of post-Stalinist, post-Maoist kind of post-Deng Xiaoping era type something or other. And, we have our distinguished comrade, Conrad Hamilton, formerly of Sublation Socialists, now of Capital Comrades.
Mm-hmm.
We have this stuff going on. And so I thought, it would probably be a discussion, especially just as to clarify myself, but also to get themselves. I mean, this is more like, you say that these discussions may be. I mean, Platypus does these kinds of discussions, right? And usually it's not a debate. Usually it's more of a conversation. And so it's not like sides to make it more interesting. But, there are these ruts that people, get into. And, for me, it's kind of like, okay, these are old debates. Like for us, for our generation, these are like kind of old debates.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they also seem bizarrely evergreen. Meaning young people somehow still find these old kind of things meaningful. And like I said, Platypus tries to deal with that phenomenon, but it is a peculiar phenomenon, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I want to pause on the Platypus panel as opposed to what you just did. The tricky thing about being a panelist through Platypus is that I've come to understand and maybe even understand on a visceral level that I am not there to present the best version of the left. I am there as someone's picked out as a particular kind of symptom.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so so whatever I do will be understood in that way, and it's much more enjoyable to watch a panel than to be on it for that reason.
For that reason.
Yeah, because you can
Well,
then.
we're all symptoms.
Yeah, I know, but when you're in the audience, you can pretend not to be, right?
That's right. That's right. No,
Right?
it's different, and it is. And of course we struggle not to be, and also maybe in struggling not to be symptomatic, that is how we're symptomatic.
Perhaps. I'm not even trying to judge it. I'm just saying that in terms of I'm not like trying to judge its political efficacy or
Right.
its morality. I'm just
Right.
saying that aesthetically and as an experience, it has more dimensionality to it for that reason.
Yes,
it requires you to think differently than you might normally think. You might normally think, yes, no, I agree with that. I don't agree with that.
Right.
Right. And
hopefully Platypus is more productive than that.
Platypus is like, okay, see how all these pieces fit together. Why is this happening? How did this rut emerge? What is the effect of this rut? I mean, in my panel, I ended up debating the Palestinian question when we were supposed to be talking about neoliberalism.
Right.
And if nothing else, you can see that the Palestinian question is a way to avoid larger political questions of the moment.
It certainly is.
Right.
And it's also a peculiarly neoliberal issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's an issue that really kind of crystallizes in the post-1967 world, but really in our time, in like the 80s and 90s, and up to the present. So it has a peculiar kind of neoliberal salience to it. So it wasn't surprising that it came up in that panel, apart from the fact that it's like a current, issue. But a lot of people of our generation, this is something that I told them in the debate I just had. I said, a lot of leftists in my generation just got lost in the Palestine question, just became obsessed with that, and really made everything about that. I mean, now like Norman Finkelstein, he's an older generation, but, and he's got his peculiarities. And, I guess the book that you published by him is not about Israel-Palestine, but like everything else is, and, it's the Holocaust industry, but really you get a sense that he's most upset about the Holocaust industry because it's a legitimating ideology for Israel. So it's kind of one-dimensional that way. And but I think a lot of people in my generation, a lot of Gen X people, were very much taken up by Israel-Palestine.
One of the things I recall most vividly from my time in the early 2000s with the Portland Peaceful Response Coalition and trying to organize protests against both the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq was that the Palestinian issue rose up as an alternative project within the peace movement, and it had more fire behind it. People seemed more excited by it. It was not the biggest part of the peace movement, but it had a lot more activity than you might expect given the moment, right? And
given what was going on.
Right. And it seemed to be a stand-in for a politics that was missing from the actual peace movement, that we couldn't develop an actual politics. So that's how I experienced it. And of course, it was also riven with unnecessary controversy and backstabbing and
people get very precious about it.
And
like there's a lot of like language policing around it. It's pretty intense, and that's one of the other things that makes it a symptomatic issue. I mean, Moishe Postone kind of coined this expression at that time, which was, if anti-Semitism is the socialism of fools, anti-Zionism is the anti-imperialism of fools. And I thought very much, and I was trying to struggle with Tara and Alexander on that issue, like just how important is the Middle East to global capitalism, really? Just how crucial is West for U.S. imperialism, and isn't Trump withdrawing? Isn't that the whole point? is to sort of put this bogged down in the Middle East behind us. And look, that doesn't mean the Middle East isn't important, but in some ways it's more important for Europe than it is for the United States.
Of course, yeah, yeah, and the all of that is true, but I don't know. It's even something about the question of what's most important to capitalism is sort of an odd question to me. Like the question for us should be where there are the most opportunities to form organizations of working class solidarity, right?
It might be quite distant from those.
Yeah.
Right. That's the thing. There's a kind of a reverse logic to it. It's like, what is the socialist response to Israel-Palestine? Well, there might not be a ready one, and that may not be where the action is. And precisely because maybe we need to organize where capitalist politics is not fully mobilized.
Yeah, where the violence of capitalist politics isn't the de rigueur and isn't the norm, where there's space for human solidarity and organizing.
We need peace.
Yeah, we need
peace. We do need peace. The same way capitalism needs peace, we need peace. And I think that people are like, no, capitalism needs war, and so we need war. And it's like, so there's a lot of, I think that the way people come to the left is strange, and I think that it's a lot of ass backward kind of tendency to begin with. And again, I was trying to sort of tease that out, like I was like, okay, Stalinist, Stalin curious, Stalin pilled, the Stalinist Institute in the UK, like what the hell is all this about? And like, what is your politics really? Like, what do you actually care about? And so it turns out like maybe Alexander McKay is more actually interested in like proletarian socialism than I would have originally thought. I get the sense of like, the ACP, like like Haas and like the neo-Stalinists, they're not really interested in socialism at all. They're just interested in calling things that they like socialist, like the Duginism or whatever. But whereas this guy is much more, seems like more critical of Stalinism. So like basically where he lands, and maybe in a way different from Conrad Hamilton, where he lands is, the debates within Marxism, Leninism in the 50s and 60s are important, and we should try to learn from them. And I thought, well, that's kind of peculiar, because at the same time, he's very anti-new leftist. And he even brackets the 30s to a large degree. Like, I think that he said up front that he thought things had degenerated since the era of the British General Strike, which is 1926. So very much in the way that I think about these things. But at the same time, the 50s and 60s still somehow seemed relevant. And I just thought, well, that is some undigested new leftism, meaning the way I understand the new left is that it came out of the crisis of Stalinism, that there was an opportunity for the new left because there was a crack up of Stalinism. That Stalinism didn't have a kind of ironclad domination on the left anymore after 1956.
That was the self-understanding of it at the time, wasn't it?
I think so. And so I think that, again, this becomes obscure history. And, I'm just not sure that the Mao-Khrushchev debate is really meaningful. Like, isn't it just an argument among gangsters? I mean, there is part of me that feels like a lot of it is sophistry. And I tried to bring that out in my opening remarks. I was kind of like, Stalinism is itself divided. And, the Soviet Union and Communist China each called each other like imperialist. And, I could have gotten even more intense about it. They called each other social fascist. Some vintage like third period Stalinism from the late 20s and early 30s. And of course they call each other revisionist. And I think of it in terms of anti-revisionism. Where did that go? I don't know. So because ultimately, I was again soft pedaling some things, and he's British. I don't know the history as well, but I suspect it's very similar. It all ended up in the Democratic Party. I feel like, didn't it all end up in the Labour Party? you know? And but that's what he's chafing against. In other words, why is he at the Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, Mao Institute? Because he got burned on Corbynism.
But I always just sort of reflexively think when people turn to anti-imperialist Stalinism after going through social democratic movements,
Right.
it is merely a way to cling to their social democratic instincts but with a new, more
Veneer.
militant veneer. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, and Mamdani, who just won,
Yeah.
is a great example of someone who can successfully put on that veneer while clinging to a very
Social
tepid
democratic.
democratic socialist, I guess,
Right.
politics of welfare, of the promise of welfare state policies returning. And
So let's say something about the Mamdani victory, because I had like really mixed feelings about it.
yeah,
Of course, I knew that it was coming, but then when it happened, I was like, ugh, And I was watching like Crystal and Sagar,
mm-hmm.
and Sagar was kind of like, didn't we already have this with De Blasio? And then Crystal was like defending De Blasio's record because he got like free pre-K,
Mm-hmm.
basically kind of city-funded childcare,
Mm-hmm.
over the objections of Andrew Cuomo as governor
Mm-hmm.
of New York, but still got it through. So she thought that Mamdani can do similar things. We'll see.
Mm-hmm.
But, and I just thought, well, okay, the only difference between Mamdani and de Blasio
Mm-hmm.
is what, the position on Israel-Palestine?
Yeah, I think so.
Right?
I mean, maybe
And I'm
Mamdani
not
has a
even sure
few,
about that.
maybe Mamdani with his free buses and supposedly I've heard of some talk of free groceries or making
Set
food
up
more.
grocery stores, basically a grocery, like a city-run grocery store, one in each of the 5 boroughs. So kind of a glorified, like not a food bank, but like a wholesale. I'm not even sure if it's going to be means tested, but I don't think so. I think it's just going to be like a wholesale, like a Costco, but run by the city, and one in each borough.
Oh, okay. And it's not like you can just go in and get free stuff. You just
You
low
buy it.
priced, the low
Yeah, it's just low
prices.
priced, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that people are complaining it's going to drive the bodegas out of business.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, maybe. I kind of don't think that will be the result, but who knows,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's all very peculiar, but it does seem like we dealt with this with the last election vibe,
Mm-hmm.
the vibe shift, so maybe Kamala didn't represent the vibe shift, but Mamdani does,
Right. Yeah,
or something.
I think no, I mean there's no vibe shift. I think Mamdani represents the last gasp of the Bernie Sanders Jacobin DSA moment and is a containing force. He is there to, the effect will be, I don't think this is his conspiracy kind of plan, but the effect will be to head off rethinking and
Yes,
radicalization, meaning getting to the root of things more than we have been.
it's some kind of gesture in the direction of how the Democrats will choose their presidential candidate in 2028. And again, what I had in mind, and you have a clip of this in the film in the last election,
Mm-hmm.
of Bill Clinton with David Dinkins in the background. And
Right.
it's kind of like, well, David Dinkins, like the election of a DSA mayor, a black DSA mayor
Mm-hmm.
in New York, did not in any way have any kind of impediment to Bill Clinton.
No.
In fact, greased the wheels for it. And so I kind of feel like this is the desperate idea, though. And I know people in New York DSA, and New York DSA I think is different from any other place in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think that this 90,000 like volunteer army that helped elect Mamdani in the primary and in the general election,
Mm-hmm.
is heavily DSA, and it seems like DSA learned something about like electoralism in that process. The question is whether it's generalizable. And, I don't think so, but I think that there are a lot of illusions. So at the time that Dinkins, was about to be elected mayor, we had also had Ruth Messenger, and she became Manhattan Borough president, also DSA.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we had a kind of DSA inflected city government in New York when I was in high school and then college. This was the time before Giuliani, and Giuliani came in later. And so that's the way I think of it. I think of it as like Dinkins led to Giuliani, and had nothing whatsoever to do with stopping like the DLC takeover of the Democratic Party, under Bill Clinton. So again, I'm always pinching myself at the level of like, am I missing something about progressivism? I took the millennial left to be like a socialist moment, but I always feel like I'm missing something about the progressive moment. But it also seems, I don't know, it seems rather thin, rather weak. But maybe I am missing something. I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know, Chris, but I've always, when I didn't quite grasp the distinction between progressivism and socialism, the talking points of a return to basically the call for a return to the welfare state, whether it was Johnson's or Roosevelt's, dominated the radical left. And around Occupy, one of the major struggles that happened was whether between those who wanted to be more radical, whether that meant embracing Foucault or anarchism or who knows what else, right? Like I remember someone at Blue Stockings saying, after Occupy, we're going to have sex differently. And I'm just like, yeah, we're going to do it with our ears. But anyhow, that was the Foucault radicalism, right? And those who wanted a very conventional left set of policies to define what Occupy is about. And that would be someone like Doug Henwood, who's at Blue Stockings as well.
Right.
And so for me, the question of like progressivism is just how it has always managed to seem like the sensible version of socialism in comparison to whatever harebrained affective stuff comes out of the anarchist contingency.
Right.
I
mean, that's yeah. So I'm thinking about it for like 10 years. Is that the neo-Stalinism, the social democracy, has been a kind of statism. And I've waited for the return of anarchism. I haven't really seen it. And then I realized that I myself was kind of doing it with the Campaign for a Socialist Party. And, and again, like there was a time back in the day when the people who annoyed me most were the anarchists, or maybe annoyed me second most. Maybe the people always who annoyed me the most were the Maoists. And yet it does seem like these are the two comparisons one can make with the Campaign for a Socialist Party, that it's like grassroots long march Maoism or anarchism. The difference being that we're not going to kind of fetishize mutual aid or social action and reject political action on principle, but also that we're really going to resist any kind of folding into the Democratic Party, which is what the Maoists were always willing to do, of course. In the name of, well, it's better to choose progressive capitalism than reactionary capitalism. And this is an endemic thing, right? So you saw it with the Marxist humanists, who are, very anti-Stalinist and yet also kind of Stalinisty that way. And the Trotskyists also, had this basic idea that, we're against the Democrats, but of course you have to prefer the Democrats over the Republicans. And I kind of feel like that just seems to be hovering in the background, which is, well, what about this era? So my latest, we talked about this a little bit last time. My latest response to Studebaker, I mentioned the progressivism, and Studebaker himself kind of rejects progressivism. He does, and yet he's part of that tendency, kind of left populism or something.
Mm-hmm.
But really, maybe the progress of the moment is being met by Trump, not by the DSA. Meaning, what is progressive here?
Mm-hmm.
And again, the Stalinists have their understanding, which is like, he was soft pedaling at Alexander McKay. I'll give him credit for that. But there was a little bit like, industrialization is progressive and financialization is reactionary.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of a basic idea. And I kind of understand where that comes from.
Well, there's a logic to it.
There is.
Productive industrialization creates a proletariat. Financialization creates more monopoly power and a service sector and
PMC.
maybe and a PMC and maybe a subaltern or a lumpen situation more.
It absolutely does, right? So that's the other thing about Mandani, and I feel bittersweet about it because I kind of feel like, look, I don't want to see Mandani fail, and yet, how will I feel when he fails? I will feel like I told you so,
Mm-hmm.
and that he is the PMC mayor. But it's interesting that it's like the PMC equals the working class mayor.
Mm-hmm.
If you read, there's an article by Katrina vanden Heuvel in The Nation on
Mm-hmm.
Mamdani's victory. And it's just this perfect elision
Mm-hmm.
of working class and PMC in the we.
Mm-hmm.
A former student of ours in Platypus, Mike Kanukin, wrote an article for Jacobin, and it's sort of a perfect complement to the Katrina vanden Heuvel, but emphasizing like what the DSA learned from the Mamdani campaign about how to conduct campaigns. And that's like Mike Kanukin is very much about that. He's very much about electioneering, and he sort of sidestepped the issue too. So it's kind of like, representing the working class versus being the working class, if I can put it so crudely. I feel like Eric Adams was your working class mayor. Mamdani is not. Both in terms of actual like sociological background and also in terms of policy, sensibility, something,
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I don't know. And I'm just in the background, I'm like, okay, so it's like anti-ICE, anti-Israel, right? And then it's like, okay, so Eric Adams was knocked out. I mean, Eric Adams would have been reelected mayor if he hadn't been taken out by Biden for opposing the immigration stuff.
I have an odd perspective on anti-ICE politics, which is that I feel as though it is a very conservative overall. It's a conservative political movement, in so much as it makes ICE into it lends a credence to ICE as a long-standing institution. I mean, I think of ICE as a product of the war on terror that, of course, should be rolled back along with the Department of Homeland Security in general, and that being anti-ICE, the way to be anti-ICE is just straightforwardly on the basis of civil liberties.
Yes.
And that it does not need to be rolled into an anti-imperialist politics or
Right.
or a politics of poverty. It does need to be rolled into a pro-immigrant politics, but that should be done on the basis of universal civil liberties based on.
Yeah. La Migra. Remember La Migra?
No, remind me.
Back in the day, so that was the INS. So
Mm-hmm.
before there was ICE and CBP, there was the INS. That was back in our day. So La Migra. I mean, what happened with Reagan, and I think that you showed at Cheech and Chong, did you?
Yeah,
not?
right. Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
Like, and it's basically like Reagan gave amnesty, but also did a crackdown.
Right.
And so it was La Migra, right? Meaning immigration. right?
Mhm.
Because there's Immigration and Naturalization Services, INS.
Mhm.
And they would do raids. They would do raids the way ICE does raids, or the way now the CBP, the Customs and Border Patrol, does raids, which is unusual because they're doing raids in Chicago and they're nowhere near the border. Except the idea is that every state is a border state. You know, both the pro and anti-immigration people will say that every state's a border state, which
Mhm.
is true enough. But I guess we are a northern border state, Illinois,
Mhm.
because across the lake somehow you get to Canada. Not too many people come that way. But
Mhm.
anyway, yeah, La Migra, INS, and so I feel like maybe there was a time which would correspond to the childhood and young adulthood of millennials and Zoom. Like there was a sort of interval between like Reagan and
Mhm.
Trump. I guess it's the halcyon day or something. I guess it's the global and it's open borders neoliberal. So
Mhm.
in trouble
Say
for by saying open borders is a Koch brothers or a Koch brothers thing.
Yeah, so just to you broke up a little bit there. So you're saying there was a period in between Reaganism and Trumpism where that influenced the politics of the Zoomers and the millennials.
Millennials, it seems like it, because it seems like, again, this is like brand new to them.
Mm.
And a lot of it, I mean, look, what Trump is doing is different. At the
Mhm.
same time, he is looking to make it a spectacle in a way that Obama and Biden, like deporting people, was not a spectacle. Like, in fact, they were trying to hide it,
Mhm.
right? Not make a spectacle of it. I feel like George W. Bush and some aspects of Obama, that they were using deportations, raids as a pressure tactic to try to push through immigration reform.
Mhm.
And there might be something residual of that to Trump, but it's hard to know.
Mhm.
So yeah, but I think that, right, our attitude in the campaign has been to address it at the level of basic civil liberties. I mean, it's the sort of know your rights kind of activism,
Right.
and its limitations, but nonetheless, it's a good starting point. It's better than like confrontations with the police or
Yeah.
confrontations with the federal authorities, hoping that you're gonna like drive a wedge between local police and federal police. Basically,
Yeah.
Fazell and I went out to dinner, and we went to, I guess it must be a Colombian chicken place, but I think it's now Ecuadorian.
Mhm.
Mr. Pollo, it's good. But it's like a hole in the wall place, but it's great.
Mhm.
And we've gone there for many years, but we went out there, and then at the counter when we went to pay, they actually had a kind of a flyer like taped to the counter, "Fuck ICE,"
Mhm.
with like some contact information. And so most of the people who eat there are themselves Latino, so they're not. It's not like, I mean, they have all sorts of customers, but I feel like it's a kind of immigrant Chicago kind of place.
Mhm.
And it struck me, it's like fuck ICE, and it's like, I agree with that at one level. At another level, I just feel like, yeah, that's kind of easy. It's easy. What's harder is thinking about how do you actually resist the, kind of draconian pressure on immigrant labor, because it's not like immigrant labor is going to be eliminated. It's just going to be put in this very in a place.
Mhm.
It's a way of disciplining immigrant labor, in fact,
Mhm.
right? And that's where I feel like, again, it's like, okay, you can hate ICE. That came up with Tara Van Dyke and Alexander McKay, because I was talking about how like the lumpen proletariat are turned into soldiers in places like Egypt and Pakistan,
Mhm.
and she was like, and turned into ICE agents in the United States, and I was like, yeah, nah, not really, no.
Mhm.
Like they warehouse the lumpen proletariat in jail. They don't recruit them all to ICE.
That's
You
right.
know, it's like, get real.
Right.
It's not really, but
Although
she jumped there.
it's a nice story to tell ourselves because I mean it's the story of Clockwork Orange, right? The
Uh huh.
lump,
Uh huh.
so but
Uh-huh.
anyway, No, I wanted to say something about a restaurant here in Colorado Springs that I've gone to a couple of times, where when I can get away, I noticed a sign near the bathroom, not at the counter, that said "Report ICE activities," and had a phone number or something you could call.
I think this is the same idea.
Mm-hmm.
Same idea. To call if you see ICE, call those numbers. Yeah.
Right, but who are you calling? And
Activists, I guess.
yeah, but to me, it just felt like, well, it was the same logic as, if you see something suspicious, report
Say
it to
something.
report it to the authorities. It's
It
like,
is.
oh, but the true authorities are the progressives who are out of power right now or something. So therefore we must report ICE activities, which is, of course.
What do you have there in Colorado Springs? Do you have a Democratic Party municipal government?
Yeah, I think so.
Here too.
Yeah.
Here too. So I feel like if you contact your pro-immigrant NGOs, you are basically contacting the Democratic Party, which means that you are contacting the municipal government. You kind of are. But I feel like it's also like, I don't know, maybe they imagine that it's like bearing witness. I mean, I kind of feel like it's that. It's like if we can get as much abusive behavior by ICE on video, that helps. And maybe it does. Like maybe it, is losing Trump popularity. I mean, I kind of feel like Trump doesn't care if it costs him the midterms, and if it costs the Republicans the 2028 election, he doesn't care. And that's like more frightening, I guess. But maybe he does care. In other words, maybe he cares, but only as a bargaining chip.
Right.
It's kind of like pressure on both the Democrats and the Republicans.
Right. Just the thing is, I guess some part of me feels as though if you're putting up your phone number to your organization, and with the slogan, report the police.
Yeah. Well, they say it's called 911. If you see ICE show up, they also do that.
Oh yeah. Okay. So it just seems as though the state is warring with itself, and that we are being called upon to be good citizens on one or the other side in service of the state, and
in service of the state.
And but there ought to be a way to be in service to ourselves and to the people who are being victimized.
The actual people,
right?
No, evidently, even Don Lemon, greatest former CNN anchor, like he has some kind of he said everyone should get strapped. And, basically like be prepared to defend yourself against like unidentified masked men. And it's kind of like, okay, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just feel like, okay, so you have some shootouts with ICE, and that is going to force Trump to withdraw them? Never.
No, it's gonna get more National Guard.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not a good. Yeah, people have lost their minds, but we should recognize who those people are. They're not. Yeah, they're the Democratic operatives and the people who have been unseated and who are clamoring at the gates now, and they will use anything to justify themselves as the legitimate heirs to power and policy. And ultimately, they're not going to serve the people much differently than the people who are in power now. They will be different, but not.
There are some policy differences.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like, did life for immigrants really get better under Biden? Like in terms of like material conditions, I mean, the Republicans are always there to say, there's all this child labor, there's all this sex trafficking, there's all this kind of slave labor conditions that all the people brought over were kind of in debt to the coyotes, to the human traffickers that they had to pay off. We saw some evidence of that here in my neighborhood, which is that there was like a migrant shelter that had like Venezuelans, and they were begging at the local grocery store, and but they were given kind of everything, including a stipend. And so why were they begging at the grocery store? Well, because they got to pay off the human traffickers. That's what they were really trying to get money for.
Right.
And it's like, okay, like you know what I mean? Like, that doesn't mean that these people should be rounded up and put on the next plane to wherever, but it does mean, if we're talking about like actual people and like suffering, it's not entirely clear that like life for immigrants was great under Biden and then it's like horrible under Trump. Especially because most of the people who have been deported, I guess, have been self-deported, and they've been given $1,000, they've been given a plane ticket, and they've been given an opportunity to reapply for entry if they voluntarily self-deport. And most people who have left, it's been under those conditions. So it's a weird thing, and I don't like the Trump policy. We are trying to use it in the campaign as an organizing opportunity. I thought it's one of the reasons why it's a good organizing opportunity is that at the very least it gives young people exposure to social reality and teaches them how to deal with people. And it's good training.
Right.
It's good experience. It's good like life experience,
Right.
to go into immigrant working class communities and help them organize.
Right.
But are we going to stop the deportations that way? Probably not.
No, right.
Right.
You're not. It's a long-term process of helping to build new institutions rather than hoping for an immediate effect politically through policy. But what I would let's go back to the supposed topic here, which
Stalinism,
is the what do you think? Obviously, there are a couple of things that you say that are the most taboo things to say. One of them is we shouldn't be so concerned about struggles of national liberation.
Right.
Another one is that the backing of Hamas, and just like a specific version of what you just of the other one, the backing of Hamas is counterproductive to socialism and even just on a human level for the lives of Palestinians.
Right.
And then I guess the third thing that you say is that there were many mistakes made by communist China and the Soviet Union that were avoidable. Those were your big taboo utterances in the debate, and all of them to me strike me as just sort of truisms almost. Like
right. Well, right. It's like that's what makes it tabooed in a way, like thought taboo. Kind of like, well, if you start thinking that, you just end up a feckless liberal or something, or you get demoralized, something, and I mean, let's start with the last one. Just, which I think that's where I really with Alexander McKay. I believe in national paths of capitalist development, let alone national paths to. And that I don't think that for the world to transition from capitalism to socialism required the industrialization of Russia.
Right.
Nor does it require the industrialization of India. That was the other example. It just doesn't. Like, will that happen? Yes. But forced industrialization? Millions of people dying? Like, was that really necessary? No.
Well, it was necessary because of it helped to produce the power that could thwart Hitler down the road.
It was very strange. It was very strange, Doug. It was very strange because I just thought, actually a lot of American capital went into beefing up the Soviet Union to fight Nazi Germany in the 30s. So I'm not sure that they did it on their own, could have done it on their own. I mean, that was the other kind of argument. The argument is that somehow the Great Leap Forward made the Deng era capitalist development of China possible. The Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, because I guess the idea is that the Cultural Revolution got rid of the vestiges of the comprador bourgeoisie and landlordism. And I'm just not sure that the landlords were like a real presence in the 1960s. Like in the late 1960s when the Cultural Revolution started. I know that the peasants like attacked each other for being like the descendants of landlords. It's like, your grandfather raped my grandmother, and now I'm going to get my revenge on you or something. But there were no landlords in China in the time of the Cultural Revolution. There wasn't a comprador bourgeoisie either.
Right.
Right. So like, I thought that was odd. And certainly I don't think that the industrial development of China starting in the 80s was based on anything produced in the Great Leap Forward. I really don't, you know? So, you know, so you got those two kind of ideas, that you needed the 5-year plan in the Soviet Union to defeat the Nazis, and you needed the Great Leap Forward in the Cultural Revolution in order to have capitalist development in China in the Deng era. And then you know, Tara Van Dyke got very angry at me. She's like, should I call it arrogance? Like, how dare you say these things are not necessary? It's arrogant. And she's like, and
she did qualify that a bit by saying she could be arrogant. Yeah.
She could be arrogant too, but basically she can be arrogant, but she's not going to be arrogant about that. You know, whereas it seems like especially arrogant for me to say, you know what? Millions of people died in Russia and China that didn't have to.
Yeah.
Like, that's my arrogance, Doug.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, I guess so. You know,
yeah.
you know, and it's like, and I just feel like, so, and then it's like, well, who knows how history is going to turn out? And so in retrospect, you know, and I just said, I don't think China's going to lead the world to socialism. That's why Alexander Mackay was kind of like, well, we don't know yet. There's going to be this struggle. Like, within the Chinese Communist Party, there are Friedmanites and there are Maoists and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, they're going to have it out. And what will be decisive is what the working class in China does. And I'm like, I agree with that. But I also feel like the working class can't do anything as long as it's dominated by the Communist Party.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, again, it's kind of like, you know, and when I'm thinking that, I'm thinking, well, Conrad Hamilton, hey, oh, you know, nothing. Like, actually, there's a lot of working class struggle. It's even fostered by the party. I maintain my skepticism.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, you know? Because, like, okay, sometimes the workers are enlisted in intra-bureaucracy.
Well, yeah,
like,
I mean,
here.
Yeah, it's just like, just throw a rock.
Like, here.
You know, yeah.
Right?
There's so much that
but I
goes
guess
on in
it's
the
so
name
arrogant.
of working class struggle that it's really just struggle between bureaucratic enclaves and things like that, where you get people are manipulated and out of self-interest they go along, and it's totally understandable, you know.
It's
And
not to demonize it, but it's
yeah,
limited.
no, totally,
And
and yeah, I just feel as though, again, maybe it's just this time of my life, you know, what I'm going through and all that. I just feel like I'm kind of longing for a moment where all this seemed surprising. That something would be said that would be a flash of, like, come from a flash of inspiration, that rather than a retread of, you know, old positions that that people cling to dogmatically in an effort to feel, I guess, like they're on the right side of history, or they're good people, or they're more militant, or they're whatever. Rather,
I mean, at basic level, to make sense of things,
mm-hmm.
some hope in the future, you know. But in some ways, I want to take people's hope away, but that seems pernicious too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the assumption that, you know, the progress will be made, or is now being made, or some groundwork for progress is being laid regardless. I mean, it's interesting. They started out by, like, Alexander Mackay saying, we don't even have the class in itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, okay, you know, like, that's the kind of thing I would say.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we don't even have the class in itself, let alone the class for itself. And yet, still, it became this national working class idea. You know,
I would always object that we don't have a class in itself. I think we definitely do have a class in itself, but I
depends on
don't
how
know.
one understands the objectivity of it. I think that we're kind of pulverized. I think we're like, what is it that Dave McCarricker says? The post-class fractured mass. This is his takeaway from the sack of potatoes. Like, I think when I read with them at the Erie Underground, I read the 18th Brumaire, and they were like shocked and like amazed, and then they're like, their takeaway was, this is what's happened to the working class. And it's like, yeah, but then it's like, oh, so we're not going to have class struggle.
Right.
And it's like, well, no, what about that being the default? And so there's two dimensions of objectivity there, and it's kind of like, again, Marx took for granted that the working class was struggling for its like collective bargaining rights and things like that. Like, early Marx had this idea that like the workers were objectively impelled to constitute themselves as a class, and not just for the struggle for socialism, but just to survive.
Right. Okay. So for you, the class for itself would be the class for socialism.
Yes.
Okay. Right. All right. So in that case, and the class in itself would be kind of trade union, self-interested rackets of workers. And
at worst, at best, like liberal, like members of society.
All right. Now I'll grant you that. Well, I just think a little bit mechanically sometimes are in the level of like political economy as I learned it. And I would just say the class of workers who produce value in society is still operative, whether or not they still struggle in the way that they did, not in a revolutionary struggle, but just in the struggle that perpetuates development.
So what these guys were getting at that's similar is they were saying that national liberation struggles are class struggles. And the reason that they are class struggles, and she started out with this, Tara started out with it, and then Alexander came back to it, is that the national liberation struggles make possible affecting the conditions for capitalist development in countries. So rather than just being exploited by the imperialist countries, literally, Alexander McKay said, it gives them a greater bargaining position vis-a-vis imperialism. And so it's kind of like a national liberation struggle is like the country understood as a labor union. Which I do think it's helpful to think of a nation state as a unit of the labor market.
Yeah.
Rather than as a like private property racket of the capitalists. I think it's more meaningfully a unit of political economy insofar as it constitutes like a working class. That there's some kind of coherent conditions for the exploitation of labor that's established in a nation state. But I also feel like it's been a long time since that's been the case. I feel like the kind of neoliberal globalism has meant that actually nation states are not coherent units of political economy at the level of working class conditions.
Yeah, and you pointed that out too when you said, the United Arab Emirates working class comes from, where did it say? Bangladesh? Yeah. Right. So does that mean that Bangladesh is proletarianizing? No.
Right.
But does it mean that the United Arab Emirates is proletarianizing? Not really, right?
Not really. And yet they are part of the global working class.
They are. But so the nation state is no longer representing a unit of work or self-organized working class power. But if there is a state if there's a state where that might still be happening, it would be in the developed world. It would be the United States or some European state, or maybe
the Scandinavian Nordic socialism. I don't know. But I feel like there's a lot of inroads there too. Meaning the presence of an immigrant workforce has really undermined a lot of that. And that's where you get this right-wing anti-immigrant thing, where they're just like the national compact has been dissolved by the presence of immigrants. But the national compact.
But when you struggle for immigrant rights inside the United States on the basis of the U.S. Constitution, you are struggling for the working class of the United States in general. You're not,
I think so.
Yeah. You're not allowing the international market to dictate completely the terms of working class life within your country, because you are protecting the rights of people based on their protection under the national constitution.
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah.
Presumably, I think that the thing is the way these things are mediated is very unclear. So even when we think about it, like in terms of political economy, I think that this is also what the Stalinists try to get at, which is the rottenness, the imperialism.
Mhm.
And why I would say that, if we try to learn the critique of capitalism from Marx's Das Kapital,
Mhm.
that one of the things that we're missing, maybe, is that by comparison, like the connection between money and value is much more tenuous now than it was then. It's not that it's broken, but it's
Mm.
mediated.
Right.
And this is what gives rise to, well, it's funny money. It's totally artificial, or, we could bemoan that, or we could embrace it via MMT or
Mhm.
something like that. And
Mm.
it's like, yeah, but actually, again, the labor theory of value, how it functions, I think that people want there to be a direct correlation, and
Mm.
it's mediated.
Yeah, but it was even mediated in Das Kapital. It
It
wasn't.
is. It absolutely is. No, I was going to say, it's not that it's not mediated from Marx, and mediation is also the site of contradiction, meaning
Mhm.
the forms of mediating value in terms of money and value in terms of labor, the forms that they were mediated through were sites of contradiction. I
Mm.
think that the idea, like the rational kernel of Stalinism,
Mhm.
is that I think that Alexander McKay brought this up, like primary and secondary contradiction. The
Mhm.
way he articulated it, it was almost like reversing it.
Mhm.
It was like, well, you need the secondary contradiction because actually it's the primary contradiction. It's like this kind of weird thing.
Mhm.
And meaning that the primary contradiction is expressed through the secondary contradiction. And I was like, okay. So I think that that's the idea, is that it's the struggle against imperialism, struggle against finance capital. They were basically immune to my argument that, look, this is a petty bourgeois complaint. Everybody hates the banks. Everybody ultimately hates the state. Everybody hates imperialism, monopoly capital.
This is the thing. You actually just said something that really summarizes my problem with this kind of conversation in general. Is that everyone goes in being immune to the other side's arguments and points, and that is typical for formal debates. That's if you were to go to a formal debate and get won over by the other side, you're not actually doing your job, right? Your job is
Right.
not to be won over by the better argument. Your job is to present the best argument you can for your position, and that's how people behave when they don't have to. When there's a it could be that you just allow yourself to be open to the better argument and think,
Explore.
yeah, and that, yeah. So, and that's what I'm hoping. If sublation has a role, and I do think it does, it's the modeling of and the practice of actual more kind of open thinking, where and not being so reflexive or hemmed in by thought typing.
I agree. I mean, I was trying to conduct such a way in the debate where I wasn't going to be a priori immune to whatever they said,
Mm-hmm.
because I felt like, okay, I'm going into this. These are people who are younger than me. Each heard what they've said before.
Mm-hmm.
I have to try to hear it differently now,
Mm-hmm.
because maybe like a young person saying it now means something different than when I heard old Maoist
Mm-hmm.
20 years ago,
Right.
you know? And so I have to just sort of be open to the idea that they're saying the same words, but it might mean something slightly different,
Mm-hmm.
and that might be a vital difference, vital
Mm-hmm.
distinction, to try to actually hear what they're trying to say with this kind of dogmatic language.
Mm-hmm.
I tried,
No,
because there is,
no, I
I don't
and
know.
I don't fault you for that. I don't for your performance at all. I'm not. I'm just saying, in the future, we could all try to be a bit more like
Yes.
what you were trying to do. Um, Listen, we've been talking for about an hour. I do think people should go and watch this debate, despite my poo pooing it, and it as
Disingenuous.
it, yeah, just as these things go. It first of all, I do think they represent maybe a smarter version of this position, and maybe one of the better versions of this position that's
I thought so.
around. And so it's worthwhile to hear them out and to think about these things and their arguments for yourself. So I would recommend people do that. I will put a link to it in the description for this video, and it's on our channel, so you can watch it on our channel. Um, And yeah, and in the next half, I'm going to go get a drink of water or something. But in the next half, what do you want to talk about? Do you think? Let's come up with something that we're promising to discuss in the parrot room.
We can talk. I was thinking about, well, again, namely that he's Benjamin Studebaker again.
Oh yeah, Studebaker.
Evidently, he is disappointed with me. He thinks that my articles that I wrote in response to him were bad articles, and he's saddened by them, he says. And I think basically the problem is that he has been disappointed that in the end I'm a dogmatic Marxist after all. So I would like to discuss how that might or might not be the case.
Yeah, okay, let's talk about your dogmatism in the second half. All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks, Chris, for doing the Cutrone Zone.